I'm Chuck Proudfit. I'm here today to talk about the significance of purpose in a meaningful life.
Welcome to the Redirect Podcast, where we explore what comes after career. Real conversations about transitioning from the 9-to-5 grind to your next great adventure. Whether you're heading into retirement or simply redefining what purpose means, we're here to inspire, inform, and help you reimagine what's next. This isn't the end of the road. It's the start of something new. Hello, guys. We're back again in the studio. Another opportunity to get something out there on the Redirect Podcast. Welcome. Good to see your smiling faces. Today, we're going to have a spirited conversation. Before we introduce our guest, I have a scenario for you, as well as a question. All of us attend church. We go there on Sundays, generally, once a week, and we go through worship, and we listen to the message, and we may volunteer at church, and that's our Sunday, right? And then comes Monday, and Tuesday, and Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday, and Saturday. Are you still in the same mindset where you were on Sunday throughout the rest of the week?
I believe I made a pretty big transition in my life. In 1996, I was very much I was a devout Catholic for 40 years and went on Sunday, and that was it until the following Sunday, generally. I really did strive and wanted to go to have a church where it was relevant all week long. My intention literally was, bring me in. I want to be part of this. And I did a lot of stuff within the Catholic Church extra, but it wasn't a week-long thing. I looked for a place that I thought had a relevant message. Crossroads, actually, when we started in 1996, really did strive to be relevant all week long. And I remember one of the messages was, is cheating on your expense report wrong? And it was something that just was focused on work and made me think all week long about, hey, what's right and wrong in my work life. But every week, I think there was a striving to do, bring up messages and topics that was going to be relevant all week long. So for a long time, I felt that I was actually kind of living that message. But as you get busier and busier, the message is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and just kind of all of a sudden Thursday and Friday you're in a rush to get to the weekend. So I'll admit that for a while then you'd kind of go the other way. But that was really important to me. It was really a reason why I wanted to be part of Crossroads at that time, because they're really hard to make a message worth living all week long.
I think the success in your walk isn't exclusively what happens to you based on what happens on Sunday. I think there's a lot of value in letting the worship, the message, that corporate church experience impact you and reshape you. I think there's a lot of value in that. But living an authentic Christian life is walking Monday and then choosing to walk again on Tuesday, and then refiring, redirecting, repurposing your walk with the Lord on Wednesday. And that retooling each day is I think the best path to a vibrant life with the Lord. And as a result, I think it's quite different. That idea is quite different than what some folks get out of church, because their relationship with the Lord is born out of what happens to them on Sunday. And there's such a long period of time before the next Sunday. And so I think that high and low of mountaintop religious experience on, Sunday, Monday, maybe a little bit of Tuesday, and then you're past the valley and as it relates to Friday and Saturday. I think that high-low, it's not that you're living an inauthentic life. It's that you're relying on church message too much to sustain you, when in reality, walking with the Lord daily is a healthier way to move forward.
I agree with everything you said, but I didn't do that.
That's real. That's honest.
Sunday was charge the battery.
Mm-hmm.
After the service, an hour later, that was a good sermon. What was it about?
Yeah.
I don't know. I had a pastor that challenged me all the time when I said, "Hey, that was a great sermon. What'd you like about it?" You know, and I'm brutally honest. It was the day to go because A, I had to go there for my kids. B, I wanted to go there. C, I wanted it to charge me up and I wanted to get inspired. But I didn't carry it forward.
That's honest.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. And it wasn't, I'm going to say very honestly, 10 years ago, I got into a thing where we did a thing called Bringing the Message Home. So we would go to the sermon. There was a group of us. It was about 8 to 10 people, couples. It forced me to take notes during the service. Now I know what the service was about. And then we'd get back to my house, and we'd have a 2-hour conversation about the service and application.
That's interesting.
And it was great, taking the message home. And what was great with that core group of friends that we would see throughout the week, we'd still have more conversation. And then when we got there the next Sunday, it was generally a sermon series, so we're building on it, and then we'd come back and meet again. And that created a cadence of having this more day to day.
That's cool.
And now I'm in a different church setting that's a large church, and I have to go out to make myself engaged. So Tuesday nights, I'm in a couples group. Thursday mornings, I'm in a men's group. Every month, I'm involved with another group to help men, but there's a Christian theme through it. And then plus, I'm a little different too. I know the value of being quiet. I know the value of prayer. I know the value of reading his word. But I also have learned to be aware of him every minute of the day, and that I have conversation with him all day long. That's where I am now. I did not have that when I was 45, 40 years old.
Yeah.
I did not even have it to the degree that I have right now 5 years ago. So I was that guy. I was just the Sunday guy. But I went to church every Sunday, though, not just on Easter and Christmas. Just saying.
Gold star for you. Gold star for you.
So well, thanks for sharing that. Why don't we introduce our guest here today, Adam?
Totally. So today's friend of the Redirect podcast is Chuck Proudfit. Chuck committed his life to Christ as a young adult, the culmination of a 10-year spiritual search. As a new Christ follower, Chuck devoted himself to a full life of faith and quickly learned how hard and lonely his commitment can be at work. Chuck was in management at Procter & Gamble, Ernest & Julio Gallo, and LensCrafters. Chuck then redirected himself and created the consultancy called SkillSource, where he served as president. Chuck also recognized the need for a vibrant workplace ministry community, restoring Christian commitment and contribution to the work world. He studied how Christians live out their faith at work and how Scripture speaks to our experiences. Chuck uncovered a consistent set of spiritual struggles faced by working Christians and a compelling set of spiritual solutions straight from God's Word. This formed as the framework for At Work on Purpose, a ministry Chuck founded in 2003 and now has a global reach. Chuck is an international speaker and teacher, and thankfully is joining us on the Redirect podcast. Chuck, glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Does that sound like you? And did we read the right one?
You did great.
Okay.
We forgot the point that I think I've known you, Chuck, since 1997,
6
8?
or 7.
Yeah.
Really long time.
Wow. That's amazing. I love how we're able to bring people back from my past so
It's like
that I
going
can
full
reconnect.
circle.
Yes, isn't it? It is very true. So you were in the corporate world. You did the corporate thing and then redirected to SkillSource. Tell us about that story. Tell us about how that happened and lessons learned.
Yeah, that question is so interesting because it has different levels, and I'll just touch on a couple of them. The first one was just understanding how I am wired and therefore where I best fit. And I think so often in work, especially if you're a young professional, you're trying to figure out where you fit. And that's why I think understanding underlying passions and purpose is so important for long-term motivation in work. And so one way I could answer your question is simply to say that as I started out in these large, industry-leading multinational firms, and it was a privilege to be able to work at all three of them, both at Procter & Gamble and then at the Ernest & Julio Gallo Winery and then at LensCrafters. I learned a ton. I had some neat projects, and I always felt like I was parking part of me at the door when I went into work. And I don't know if any of you have ever felt that way, but I sure did.
What part were you leaving at the door?
So I was working my way up the corporate ladder, and I would be assigned to a position and a set of responsibilities with variable authority. You know, sometimes you get more responsibility than authority. You guys get all that. But my point is, I am wired to see the big picture, but most of the roles that I held were about a very specific niche area of very large companies. I was so hungry to be able to step back and look at that bigger picture, to be able to speak strategically into larger questions, but it wasn't part of my role. And I had come to all of these corporations from an entrepreneurial background. I had started my first company in high school, paid for a lot of my college with it. And then I started a second company in college, entrepreneurially, that I sold to Harvard University when I graduated and still operates. So I had to force fit myself to be a corporate animal as an entrepreneurial person. And SkillSource became my entrepreneurial outlet where I could finally not park any of me at the door when I went to work. And that's part of the answer that I'd offer to you, Dale, is that journey that so many of us make in our work lives where we're trying to figure out where we fit. The other part of that story, though, which has a much more spiritual versus just vocational tenor to it, when I started at Procter & Gamble, I was assigned to a struggling brand. It was what was then called White Cloud toilet paper, or bath tissue if you work at P&G. It's
important differentiation.
It's an important differentiation for all of the Procter & Gamble people listening to this. I haven't forgotten after all these years. White Cloud is now Charmin Ultra, although most people wouldn't care. But back in the day, it was endeavoring to be its own brand, and it was doing only $59 million a year in sales, and it wasn't meeting the profit targets of the company. I was brought in, according to my manager, to bring an entrepreneurial spark to toilet paper. I told him, I said, that sounds really flammable.
Yeah, I was going to say, did it go up in smoke?
Well, after about 6 months, everything did catch on fire. The brand was struggling. My brand group, they all lost their jobs because of the failure of the brand to perform. And I ended up as a senior person on the brand at age 22 with only 6 months of tenure. And I was traveling all over the country talking to our consumers. These were female heads of household, aged 25 to 54. And basically what they were telling us was this product is over-engineered. It's softer and thicker than we want to flush down the toilet at that price. So the only way that ultimately we could increase profitability was to take what's called a sheet count reduction. It's an indirect price increase. Like when you buy a bag of potato chips, and it looks so full, and you open it up and it's 2/3 air and like the third on the bottom is the chips. Well, that's what this felt like to me. So I worked with manufacturing plants across the country. We took 30 sheets off of each roll. We wound the rolls more loosely, so the diameter was the same as before the sheet count reduction. And my job was to market the product as new and improved. New because it had 30 fewer sheets, and improved because it was thicker than ever. We took a tiny increase in the thickness, the basis weight of the product. And I was not inspired by this project. It got me promoted, but it wasn't purposeful for me. And I didn't know how to reconcile those. The world was telling me I'd made it. This is a classic job. I'm getting promoted. It's prestigious to work at Procter & Gamble. It's a training ground, all these things. And all of it was true. But for me, all of it was also false. And I didn't know how to reconcile that. And it became, for me, what I jokingly describe as a quarter life crisis. You know, most people have a midlife crisis.
Right. Well, he's 22.
I had a quarter life crisis. And I didn't know what to do with my work life. More generally, I was really questioning my whole life. And it triggered a spiritual search for me. So my frustration with work led me to a decade-long study of comparative world religion and philosophy, which led me to Christianity.
That's quite the journey from toilet paper bathroom
Yes.
tissue to Christ.
Yes.
It's quite the journey.
Yes, from White Cloud to Christ.
Yeah.
Sounds like a book. Sounds like a book.
It's catchy. It's catchy.
And that's why I wanted to answer your question from two vantage points, because I think so often in the workplace we're trying to figure out vocationally where we fit, because there's a deep innate desire not just to produce, but to be purposeful. And then there's an even bigger question, which is, how does purposeful work fit into a purposeful life? So it's not just ultimately a vocational question, it's foundationally a spiritual question. Why was I created? What is my purpose in this world?
And that was it. I'm sorry, 22?
22.
Fascinating. How did you even approach that? You were Harvard trained, so of course you've got methods and ways, and trained at Procter, and you brought all that to bear as you go through this analysis that got you to...
It was embarrassingly analytical. I created a spreadsheet, which was large enough to fit on the table where we're doing our podcast.
Have I introduced you to my friend Curt?
My man.
He's getting really excited right now.
My man.
Planning.
The columns were all of these huge questions. Is there a God? Is there one God or multiple gods? Do you live once? Is there reincarnation? All of these huge questions, right? And then the rows I organized in, this is another Procter & Gamble expression, in tertiles. So the top third, middle third, bottom third. So the top third, these were definitely religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam. The ones in the middle tertile were questionable, like Buddhism. Some people would consider that a religious faith. Others would view it as a philosophical viewpoint. And then there are others that the bottom tertile are definitely philosophy, like Taoism, Confucianism. Anyway, I spent 10 years filling out this giant spreadsheet, and then I started wrestling with the final set of big questions for me that ultimately led to this journey from my head to my heart. You know, there was this one pivotal issue I was really struggling to resolve, and when I could finally resolve it, I ended up selecting, if that's the right word, really surrendering would be the proper word, to Christianity, because it best fit the reality I was experiencing.
On my way here, I had a thought that just kind of ran over me, like, hey, truth has nothing to fear from honest investigation.
Yes.
It sounds out of place, but I don't think it is, to suggest that looking at faith, looking at a religious or spiritual journey analytically, I want to build an equation that outputs an answer to my question. And does it look like a math equation? I don't really know in spiritual application, but analytical investigation of facts and details, and if it ends up leading you to the truth surrounding God, that's a great process to go through. I mean, it's not everybody's journey, but what a blessing.
To build on what you're saying, I began to realize in this journey for me that there's almost like a little equation. Belief equals reasons plus faith. And all of us have different ratios there. I'm a guy who needed a lot of reasons to believe. I could take a step of faith, but I wasn't the kind of guy who could take a leap of faith. I know others who are very faith-filled, and they don't need a lot of reasons. If they sense that this is faithfully where they should be, that that's what they believe. But I learned about myself that I needed those reasons in order to take that step of faith.
And that spreadsheet contributed some of those reasons.
It certainly did.
That's cool.
So let's move forward. So you had Skill Source, and you were doing that, and then you came into this concept of At Work on Purpose. What's that all about?
To set the stage for At Work on Purpose with Skill Source, I was thrilled when I finally left corporate and I was starting an entrepreneurial consultancy. And my original vision for that was bringing all of the big business skills and tools to smaller to mid-sized companies at an affordable price, and that I could create a way to be available almost like a project manager and select contractors who were a great fit for a particular project. And by keeping the overhead low, where I was the only employee and everyone else was contracted for projects, I could provide an affordable price point that would enable me to work with clients all the way through the implementation, not just what the idea was, but all the initiative that gets you to your outcome. And that model really worked. Today, it's commonplace, but back when I started SkillSource in the mid-1990s, you weren't considered really all that credible until you had employees. Then you were a real business. Mm-hmm. And so I was swimming upstream there, but I felt convicted, I think is a good word, that the only way I could really generate lasting value for the client was to make sure that I saw things through with them to completion so they got results. That really mattered to me. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because as a new believer, so I launched SkillSource in 1995 and I became a Christian in 1996. I wanted SkillSource to be a Christ-centered consultancy. Those were the phrases I used back in the day. I had no clue how to do that. I had no role models. There was nothing in writing. It's not like there were books or courses or any community of support at all. My journey was entirely trial and error. And boy, did I learn a lot in the early months and years. You know, I learned phrases that I'd never heard before because I didn't grow up in a spiritual household at all. Things like you don't talk about religion and politics at work. Well, I discovered that quickly when I would even bring up a religious conversation in the workplace and people would push back. And I was surprised because my frame of reference for the church was largely the early church in the New Testament. They had no division between their faith in any aspect of life. So whether you were at home, at work, at large, it didn't matter. You were bringing your faith with you in the way that you would think and the way you would choose. And you were either moving in the direction of God's will, which is good, or away from it, which was bad. And my frame of reference was that simple, but it wasn't easy. So I started to learn how to be, as I like to say, faith active at work through a consulting firm that, in my language, is positioned to be plain glass, not stained glass. So the clients that are hiring me to bring problems for their solutions. The way I understand it inside is I'm bringing the kingdom to their organization. But I'm not going to use that language because they would short circuit. But when I meet their needs and build credibility, and they ask where those ideas came from or what drives my passion or whatever, they open a door for me to speak into faith at work. I learned how to do that, but I had to basically walk with God to teach myself. And I'm telling you this because that is really lonely. And at one point, I decided I want to create a life group for work life, just like, a dozen people who care about faith at work like I do, that we could just, like you have small groups at church, we would have a small group that would meet a couple times a month about faith at work. I could not find a local church that would host it. They all said it was off strategy. They'd all had their strategies for small groups and stuff. And being an entrepreneurial guy, I'm like, fine, I'll do it myself. So I did. And I recruited about a dozen people from around the city of Cincinnati who, like me, were passionate about faith lived out at work. But we came from all kinds of different vocational backgrounds. We lived in different parts of the city. We attended different church homes. We represented different denominations. And I loved that about this group, that the conversations were electric. The Holy Spirit moved. And there wasn't any organized curriculum. I would facilitate conversation. But entirely through word of mouth, with no intention to grow, within 6 months, we went from 12 people to over 300 people involved in small groups meeting to talk about faith at work. And all of a sudden, hundreds of these working Christians are looking at me and saying, Chuck, this is becoming a ministry and you need to lead it. And that was overwhelming for me because I didn't have a clue how to do that at all.
Were there any benchmarks out there that, as you did your analysis, nobody did this?
There were workplace ministries, but they didn't look at all like this. So typically what you will find is that there are workplace ministries in cities, just like you have lots of local churches in cities, but they typically operate in silos. They're often very territorial, although they won't admit that. And they typically don't really connect with each other. They don't talk to each other. They don't work with each other. But what had happened here, serendipitously, was we simply brought together a pile of working Christians who wanted to live out faith at work, who were bridge builders who are coming from all these different vantage points and places and spaces. And that was really cool, but it looked like an organism, not an organization.
Time for a quick break. If you're liking what you're hearing, do us a quick favor. Hit that follow button, share it with your friends and family, drop us a quick comment, and then a 5-star review. It really helps us keep going and growing. Then head over to Instagram and follow us there too. Thanks for the help, and now let's get back to work. If all of those other entities probably had some affiliation with a particular church, right? They were born out of, some initiative from a local church to do this kind of work. Well, you're operating under the umbrella of that organization. And so you're just Chuck and the Lord. I'm working, I'm trying to live. And so there's no organizational structure. There's a lot less territorialism and a lot less ego. I mean, maybe your own ego you have to battle with, I'm sure, but there's nobody's trying to say you got to do it a certain way because the body of believers or the pastor saying it's got to yield this kind of outcome. So it's just people hanging out, right?
You're bringing up some really interesting points. The workplace ministries are typically structured very corporately. They'll often be set up with chapters or through licensing where they'll have material, and understandably, because many of them are led by Christians who are in the private sector, they're in business, they are structured like businesses, even though they're providing ministry. One would think that they would flow naturally out of local churches, but in reality, the vast majority have been launched and developed completely separate from the local church. Because by and large, the local church is very, what's the best way for me to say this? The local church does not register the workplace well. Think about
it's disassociated. It's just disassociated completely.
The ministries that local churches typically provide: men's ministry, women's ministry, marriage ministry, youth ministry, children's ministry, recover ministry. I'm an elder in a local church, and I love the local church, but the hard truth is that the vast majority of local churches don't focus on work life. And even when they provide messaging about it, they don't understand method, because most of the professional staff inside of local churches have very limited exposure to the gritty realities in the foxholes and the trenches that we work in. So there's this massive disconnect. And what I saw in front of me was hundreds of working Christians who were like a pile of people who wanted to be organized more like a movement or a network. And when I would look at traditional corporate structures, those didn't fit. By the way, that's what I was trained in. So at Harvard, my degrees in organizational development, all these places where I had been in general management, totally corporate structures. And this was not that. So there was nothing from what I had learned there that I could apply here. To make it even more complicated, if you look at local church and parachurch organizations, they're not structured like this either. typically. So the simplest marketplace analogy I could make for what became At Work on Purpose is it's like a LinkedIn for working Christians. You opt into a social network where people have a common area of interest, in this case, faith activity at work, and then they participate where they want to.
Interesting.
How can we, our podcast is based on the retirement group, and here we're talking about an employed group, right?
Yes.
This concept of you're at work on purpose, how can that be brought into those that are not at work anymore?
Well, this is a huge question you're bringing up, and I'm passionate about it because my philosophical and theological viewpoint is those people are still at work. Our society has created a distorted view of work. So our society says that you go to work and have a career until you can retire, and then you don't have to work anymore. That is not biblical. I mean, biblically speaking, we don't retire, we do expire. But there's a huge difference. And if you think about so many of the figures in biblical history, like Caleb, who in his 80s is described in Scripture as having all the passion and energy of a young man, right, as the Israelites want to take the promised land. And think about that. This is like a guy who's chronologically a lot older, but he doesn't have a retirement mindset at all, but our culture does. And it's heartbreaking. You have so many people who have decades of experience, tremendous skills, and lots of capability and availability, but by the standards of the work world, they're considered out to pasture. And so in some ways, these are years that could be their most fruitful years vocationally, just not perhaps paid in the same way. And yet our society creates these mindsets, these mental models that distort our ability to see the opportunity. So I'm passionate about people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s being able to be at work on purpose, literally.
If you go, a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, what does at work on purpose mean for the retirees? What's success out there? What do you see as an entrepreneur, for this segment?
As I've gotten to know more and more of the people in this segment, as my aging brings me closer and closer to this segment, I'm discovering a convergence with one word, which I would put forward. It's legacy. These are people who recognize that they still have treadwear where they can be leaving the world better than they found it. And they're looking for avenues or open doors through which they can do that. These are people that could serve in an advisory capacity for others who really need that perspective. They could be supplementary staff support on a contracted basis for organizations that really need fractional help. These people could be seeing problems and fixes in their industries because of their vantage point that others would miss. And they could speak into that. They could be thought leaders and architects for the future in ways that younger people simply could not.
So in your version of retirees, people in redirection, living at work on purpose, what you're describing is like literally still at work, like working for a company, possibly maybe even in your same industry that you were for the majority of your career. Is that true?
That's one expression, but it's not limited to that. It could be somebody else who says, man, I want to take my time and I want to work on the next generation. I want to start, getting involved with, big brothers, big sisters. I want to start discipling younger people. It could take mentoring. It could take so many different forms. It could be somebody, I know a guy, I'm seeing him next week in Colorado. He's 76. And he's really trying to lead the thinking and create a collaborative network for an entire, I'll call it a movement of bringing faith into cities, a faithful life and flourishing on a city scale. And this is a guy that the world would say should be long since retired.
And what's unique is that he has brought forth his view that I need to bring my legacy forward. And you're saying faith into cities. Would he do that? And you're meeting him. Tell me just more about what he wants.
Sure.
What he's looking for.
Well, first of all, you heard him speak at the Excel Summit that At Work on Purpose hosted in July. It was Dr. Eric Swanson. One of his many publications is a book to transform a city. His point is that Christians collectively in a city have the capacity vocationally and spiritually to truly bring flourishing to cities by working together to raise the water level. And he spent decades organizing groups of people and leaders within cities and across cities to do exactly this. So the gathering I'll attend next week has people like me who are passionate for that idea from across the country. And he's essentially mentoring us. And here's a guy in his now second half of his 70s who is at the forefront of artificial intelligence and how to deploy it for some of the applications that, could make some of this work easier or get us traction more quickly. That's remarkable to me. This is a guy, financially speaking, he's set. He doesn't need to be doing all of this, but he wants to be doing this because he's building a legacy for the future. In spiritual language, he is storing up treasures in heaven.
What is a challenge? Like the generational separation has got to be a challenge. Here's a guy that's 76 years old that has a lot to give back, wants to go forward, wants to be engaging, but he's dealing with another generation that may see him as irrelevant. Is he going towards like-minded people, or is he going towards the whole body and trying to influence the whole body?
Great question. I've never
I did another great question there.
Two.
I've never really stopped to ponder his strategies, but now that you've asked, there are a few things that come to mind that I think are really smart on his part. The first is what's called centered set versus bounded set thinking. So he's identifying a cause, which is flourishing cities, and he's centered on that, and he's attracting people regardless of their age who have a passion for that same area. So he brings like-mindedness right out of the gate. The second thing, he's got an expression. He loves to say the answers are in the room. And in other words, his style is essentially to bring people together and then showcase their expertise in service to the whole. So he's not coming to everybody with, hey, because I'm older, I've got the answers. He's coming as an older leader who is basically lifting up the viewpoints and the tools and the perspectives of others across an age range. The third thing that he does regularly is he's constantly looking for ways to add value to the people in his network, connecting people to each other. Every month he's putting out a little nugget on artificial intelligence and applications in the city space. And, he's really trying to help plow ground in helpful ways for others. I mean, deliberately wondering to himself, how can I be helpful to that person? How can I be helpful to that city?
So as somebody that may have an interest in an AI movement will read his article and then all of a sudden is being confronted with the idea of building a city and community through AI, which then leads to other stories of like-mindedness potential.
Right. And AI is just one of many things that he would bring forward. But it's really interesting. Most people in that age group are extremely resistant to even learn about artificial intelligence. Right. And it is a rather daunting field of study on many levels. It's not just operationally, but philosophically and theologically. Like, where does it begin and end, and what's appropriate and not? And here's a guy who's diving in head first to take a tough issue and try to plow some ground.
Yeah.
How do you bring that to encourage the average listener to our podcast, someone who is approaching retirement, someone who's been living in retirement, and they're learning this idea of, hey, maybe I need to not adopt the world's view and not be content with being out to pasture. I want to go activate purpose in my life. How do I I'm already taking the 401k, right? I'm already in my pension. I'm already in my investments to fund my living after my career. How do I bring this at work on purpose approach to where I am already?
That's another great question. The first thing that comes to mind for me is we have to challenge our own stinking thinking. So often it's our mindsets that hold us back. Sometimes our biggest constraints are ourselves. We are so conditioned by the world to see retirement as something that essentially is an ending instead of a transition. Like I'm done working instead of I'm going to reimagine my work. There's a huge difference in mindset there. But we often hold these thoughts in our heads and don't even realize we are. They're so ingrained that we don't recognize them anymore. In the space of faith at work, what's called the sacred secular divide is another example of a mindset that's very problematic. So people are trained or conditioned to believe that Sundays or weekends are sacred and work weeks are secular. And it's reinforced by society. And then we start to believe that worship is music in a church service instead of the idea that worship is the way we live our lives. And work is one of the most important forms of worship. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So until you can change your frame of reference, your thinking, you won't go any further. And I would just encourage everybody listening to this to pause and say, what are my beliefs really? What am I truly thinking? What are the narratives that are guiding the way I see retirement?
And I love the fact that he has recognized there's true value in the room, and our listening audience needs to, and I think go back to some of the other podcasts where we talk about know your story, know what you're bringing forward. Legacy are those gifts that you get to bring forward, but he's recognizing you all have value out there and you got to move on it.
Totally. And that's why, for me, I often use that word refirement because it directly challenges the word retirement. Mm-hmm. Instead of retire, refire. What would repurposing look like? What would redirecting look like? Which brings me to my second point, just to finish answering your question quickly. It's been my experience that once we wrestle with our own thinking, then it's to say, where are my areas of passion? This is a season of work life where I can pursue work because I'm excited about it. There are seasons in life, understandably, where you just need a job. It doesn't mean that you don't honor the job or that you don't appreciate that you've got one, but it may not light your fire. It may not be that, but in this season, it's like, where would I want to work? What kind of work would I want to pursue? I think passion is huge here. And I've been struck with so many people that it's like their dreams for purposeful work died over the course of their careers. They spent so many years doing work that they hated. My father, a tenured English professor, I came to visit him about a year before he retired. And he had a clock on his desk. It looked like a pyramid, and it was counting down. And I said, Dad, what is that? He said, that's a countdown clock until I never have to work again. My dad hated his job, but it was a secure one. So I think really reigniting passion is critical, like what you feel, what you have a heart for. And then to think about, okay, what are the avenues or options available to me to get started? It's not about like having some grand plan. It's getting going. And that would be my third piece of advice is just get started.
Right.
Go out and do something about it, right, Adam?
Step out. That sounds familiar.
It sure does. It sure does. Well, Chuck, I thank you so much for sharing your story. And it's a story that is, I didn't know a lot of this stuff before today. And I'm taken back by how you just felt, as you said, you had left something at the door when you went to work, and now you're a whole person doing stuff. And I think that's awesome, because I think a lot of us in the work world do check only a part of ourselves into work, and they keep a lot of the core stuff of what we're all about away from it. And to be able to do that, and now you're proposing an opportunity to have that same concept in a work aspect on purpose, it's great. I can't say enough how much I appreciate learning what your story is and how it's coming to life.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so good to see you and have you back here.
And you.
And the fact that it's at work on purpose. The purpose thing keeps coming back, and that's the challenge for all of us, is to continue to do the work in progress around finding that purpose, that joy, that spark. And thank you for that.
You are welcome.
Chuck, if people want to get a hold of you or get some of your content, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
The easiest way is just to visit the website atworkonpurpose.org. And my direct email is just chuck@atworkonpurpose.org.
And thanks for joining us on the Redirect Podcast.
We'd like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to the 1819 Innovation Lab at the University of Cincinnati for their incredible support and partnership making this show possible. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find more of our content on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as Instagram. Have questions or want to connect? Drop us a line at info@redirect-u.com. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, there's purpose in your life, so find it and go do something about it.
Hey, I've got one more comment. The Redirect Podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. We engage in an open, honest conversations about personal growth, life transitions, and the lessons we've learned through our own experiences. While we speak as experts in our own lives, we are not licensed therapists, medical professionals, or certified coaches. The content shared on the Redirect Podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the guidance of qualified professionals for any physical, mental, or emotional concerns that you may have. We're grateful to share this space with you and hope that our stories inspire reflection and connection. If you're in need of more support, we encourage you to connect with a trusted professional who can help.